The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dense forest. Emma adjusted her backpack, tightened the laces of her hiking boots, and took a deep breath of the fresh, pine-scented air. She had been planning this solo hike for months, a chance to escape the bustling city and find some peace in nature. Little did she know, this hike would be anything but peaceful. The trailhead sign read, Whispering Pines Loop, 15 miles. It was a well-known trail, popular among seasoned hikers for its scenic views and challenging terrain. Emma was no novice. She had hiked numerous trails, each more difficult than the last. This was just another adventure. She started her hike with a confident stride, her footsteps crunching rhythmically on the gravel path. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, birds chirping, leaves rustling, and the distant babble of a brook. Emma felt a sense of tranquility wash over her, the stresses of city life melting away with each step. As she ventured deeper into the woods, the trail became narrower and the trees thicker, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. The temperature dropped slightly, and a cool breeze whispered through the leaves, sending shivers down her spine. Emma pulled her jacket tighter around her and pressed on. After a few hours of hiking, Emma found a small clearing where she decided to take a break. She sat on a fallen log, sipped from her water bottle, and enjoyed a granola bar. The sun was now barely visible through the dense foliage, casting an eerie twilight glow over the forest. It was then that she noticed the silence. The birds had stopped singing, and the usual sounds of the forest were absent. Emma felt a sudden unease, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She scanned the trees, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Shaking off the feeling, she stood up and resumed her hike. The trail grew steeper and more rugged, but Emma relished the challenge. She lost herself in the rhythm of her steps, the steady ascent clearing her mind. As dusk approached, she reached a section of the trail that was particularly narrow, flanked by tall, ancient trees. The air was heavy with the scent of moss and earth. Emma's footfalls seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. She felt as if she were being watched. She paused, turning slowly to scan the forest around her. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. She saw no movement, no sign of life, yet the feeling persisted. Deciding it was just her imagination, Emma shook her head and continued on. But the sense of unease lingered, growing stronger with each step. Nightfall came quickly in the dense forest. Emma set up her small tent in a sheltered spot off the trail, her headlamp casting a weak circle of light in the encroaching darkness. She built a small fire and cooked a simple meal, the warmth and light a comfort against the oppressive blackness of the woods. As she sat by the fire, she heard a rustling in the underbrush. Emma's heart skipped a beat, and she froze, listening intently. The sound stopped, and she convinced herself it was just a small animal. But when the rustling resumed, this time closer, she felt a surge of fear. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Is someone there?" There was no response, only the crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind through the trees. Emma felt foolish for letting her imagination get the better of her. She took a deep breath and settled back down, trying to relax. But as she lay in her tent that night, sleep eluded her. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, set her nerves on edge. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone in these woods. The next morning, Emma awoke groggy and unsettled. She packed up her camp quickly, eager to put some distance between herself and the unsettling night. The forest seemed even darker today, the trees pressing in closer, their branches forming a tangled web overhead. As she hiked, she noticed strange marks on the trees, deep gouges that looked like claw marks. Her unease grew. She tried to dismiss them as the work of bears or some other animal, but a nagging voice in her mind whispered otherwise. The trail grew more difficult, winding through thick underbrush and over rocky terrain. Emma's legs ached, and she felt a growing sense of dread with each step. She was miles from civilization, alone in the vast forest. If something were to happen, there would be no one to help her. She paused to catch her breath and take a sip of water. The forest was eerily silent again. No birds, No insects, just the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She had the distinct feeling she was being watched. Pushing the fear aside, she continued on, but the sense of being followed grew stronger. She glanced over her shoulder repeatedly, but saw nothing. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees crowding together, their branches forming a barrier that blocked out the light. As the day wore on, Emma's fear turned to paranoia. She quickened her pace, her eyes darting to every shadow, every movement in the corner of her vision. She stumbled over roots and rocks, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She rounded a bend in the trail and came face to face with a cave. The dark entrance gaped like a mouth, promising shelter but also hiding unknown dangers. Emma hesitated, torn between the safety of the open trail and the potential refuge of the cave. A low growl echoed from the trees behind her. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. Without thinking, she bolted for the cave, her footsteps echoing on the rocky ground. She dove inside, her flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. The cave was small, just a shallow hollow in the rock. Emma crouched in the darkness, her back against the cold stone. She turned off her flashlight, plunging herself into complete darkness. She listened, her ears straining for any sound. Outside, the forest was silent once more. Emma held her breath, her eyes wide in the darkness. She felt a presence, something watching her, waiting. The air grew colder, and she shivered, clutching her flashlight like a lifeline. Emma stayed in the cave for what felt like hours, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. She couldn't stay here forever, but the thought of stepping back into the forest filled her with dread. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Summoning her courage, she turned on her flashlight and edged towards the cave entrance. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees outside. Everything was still. Emma took a cautious step forward, then another. As she emerged from the cave, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Deep footprints, larger than any animal she knew, pressed into the soft earth. They led away from the cave and into the forest. Whatever had made them was no ordinary creature. Emma's mind raced. She needed to get out of these woods, and fast. She picked up her pace, jogging along the trail, her eyes scanning for any sign of danger. The footprints were a constant reminder that she was not alone. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the trail, Emma heard the growl again. This time, it was closer, more menacing. She broke into a run, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees like twisted specters reaching out to grab her. She stumbled, her foot catching on a root, and fell hard to the ground. Pain shot through her ankle, but she forced herself to get up and keep moving. The growl came again, this time right behind her. Emma didn't dare look back. As darkness fell, Emma found herself in another clearing. Her ankle throbbed, and she knew she couldn't go much further without rest. She built a small fire, hoping the light would keep whatever was stalking her at bay. She sat by the fire, her eyes darting to the shadows beyond the circle of light. The forest was silent again, the oppressive silence that had become all too familiar. Emma felt a sense of hopelessness wash over her. She was alone, injured, and being hunted by something she couldn't see. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night sky. Emma's thoughts were a jumble of fear and exhaustion. She tried to think of a plan, some way to escape, but her mind was clouded with terror. Suddenly she heard a low, guttural snarl from the edge of the clearing. Her heart leapt into her throat. She grabbed a stick from the fire, the end glowing with embers, and held it out like a weapon. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, reflecting the firelight. They were too high off the ground to belong to any known animal. Emma's breath caught in her chest as she realized the creature was standing upright. The eyes moved closer, and she could make out a hulking silhouette. It was massive, covered in dark fur, with long, clawed hands. The creature stepped into the light, and Emma felt a wave of terror unlike anything she had ever experienced. Emma knew she couldn't stay and fight. Her only chance was to run. She threw the burning stick at the creature and bolted for the trees. Pain shot through her injured ankle, but adrenaline pushed her forward. The creature let out a deafening roar, and Emma heard it crashing through the underbrush behind her. She ran blindly, branches whipping her face and tearing at her clothes. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees a blur in her panic. She stumbled and fell, the ground hard and unforgiving. Desperate, she crawled under a thick bush, hoping the creature would pass by without noticing her. She held her breath, every muscle tensed. The creature's footsteps drew closer, heavy and deliberate. Emma could hear its breathing, a low, menacing growl that sent shivers down her spine. It stopped just feet from her hiding place, sniffing the air. Emma prayed it wouldn't find her. She could feel the ground tremble with each step it took, the sound of its claws scraping against the earth. Time seemed to stretch on forever as she waited, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the creature moved on, its footsteps growing fainter. Emma waited until she was sure it was gone before crawling out from under the bush. She was exhausted, her body aching and her mind racing with fear. Emma knew she couldn't keep running forever. She needed a plan, some way to outsmart the creature. She searched her backpack for anything that could help and found a small flare gun. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She limped along the trail, her eyes scanning for a defensible spot. The forest was still and silent, the trees looming like dark sentinels. Emma felt a sense of urgency, knowing the creature could return at any moment. After what felt like hours, she found a rocky outcrop with a narrow entrance. It would be easier to defend, and the rocks might provide some protection. She climbed up, wincing with each step, and settled in with her back to the rock wall. She loaded the flare gun and waited, every muscle tensed. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the silence oppressive. Emma's mind raced with thoughts of survival, her fear tempered by determination. The creature's growl echoed through the trees, closer than before. Emma gripped the flare gun tightly, her hands shaking. She could see its eyes glowing in the darkness, moving closer. When the creature was just a few feet away, Emma fired the flare gun. The bright light and loud noise startled the creature, causing it to rear back with a roar. Emma didn't hesitate. She scrambled down the rocks and ran, using the flare as a distraction. The forest was a blur as she sprinted, her injured ankle screaming in protest. She didn't look back, didn't stop until she saw the faint glow of dawn breaking through the trees. The creature's growls faded into the distance, but Emma knew she wasn't safe yet. Emma stumbled out of the forest and onto a dirt road. She fell to her knees, her body shaking with exhaustion and relief. She looked up and saw a truck approaching, its headlights cutting through the early morning mist. The truck stopped and a man got out, rushing to her side. "Are you okay? What happened?" Emma tried to speak, but her voice came out in a hoarse whisper. "There's something in the woods. It's hunting me." The man helped her into the truck, his expression a mix of concern and disbelief. He drove her to the nearest town, where she was taken to the hospital and treated for her injuries. As she lay in the hospital bed, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, lurking in the shadows. She had escaped, but she knew the memory of those glowing eyes and the terror of that night would haunt her forever. Weeks passed, and Emma's physical wounds healed, but the psychological scars remained. She couldn't go near the woods without feeling a surge of panic, and she was plagued by nightmares of the creature. She tried to tell people what had happened, but most dismissed her story as the result of stress and exhaustion. Only a few believed her, their eyes filled with the same fear she felt. Emma moved to a new city, far from the forest, but the sense of being watched never left her. She installed extra locks on her doors and kept a light on at night, always on edge, always waiting. The creature had disappeared back into the shadows, but Emma knew it was still out there, lurking in the depths of the forest, waiting for its next victim. She had survived, but the hunt was far from over. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the forest, the creature waited, its glowing eyes ever watchful, its hunger never sated. Emma's story was a warning, a reminder that some things are better left undisturbed, and that the true horrors of the world are often hidden in the darkest corners of our minds.